Hello everyone, the protagonist of this fantasy webtoon is Empress Navier Eliie Trovi. Sovieshu, the crown prince and Empress Navier husband, wants to divorce her and marry his concubine Rashta instead, which is how the story began. I will accept the divorce. Am I the only one who had a faint smile on my lips when I said those words? Sovieshu looked down at me with a half-relieved, half-regretful expression. Was it a charade or was it sincere? Until now I had been a good colleague and a perfect empress. We had never fought, that is until he brought her along. He cast me aside for his lover, but until the last moment he'll want to be a good man and a good emperor. Then there was my family, and the great church which had approved of our marriage, who insisted that I not step down from the position of empress. He would certainly dislike the idea of going through a tedious divorce trial against both of these groups. He was that sort of man and that sort of emperor. "Your Majesty, this can't be!" Marquis Farron cried out, and tried to run towards me, but he was caught by the Emperor's guards and barred from taking a step further. "Marquis Farron and Countess Eliza, my defenders, I am thankful to all of you." I cast them a grateful glance, then turned to the court minister. "Empress Navier, do you really agree to this divorce document without any objection?" The court minister had a slightly angry voice. He wanted me to fight and challenge the reason for divorce, while the odds of winning the trial were none. It would cause a scandal for the emperor and his concubine as the people heard the news. That was what the minister, my family, and my friends wanted. I shook my head. A divorce trial may hurt Sovieshu's reputation, but my name may be scarred as well. It's not that I had a moral problem, but I might not be able to leverage the situation if it became too complicated. "I accept the divorce." The minister closed his eyes gravely as murmuring broke out into the room and asked for permission to remarry. The moment I finished speaking, the mood changed completely. The air stilled into a shocked silence, and the minister's eyes flew open. Everyone glanced at each other, unsure of what they heard. Sovieshu looked at me confusedly, a frown furrowing his brow. The minister was in a daze. "Empress Navier, remarry." Instead of answering, I stretched out my hand and pointed to one place. As if a man wearing an embroidered veil that obscured his face burst into pleasant laughter. "Do I come up now?" The silence was broken by the murmuring of the crowd again. The man walked through the court and stood next to me. When he took off the veil, Sovieshu leapt to his feet. "Navier, that man is the one I will marry." The minister's eyes looked hollow. I smiled and turned the man beside me. He looked at me as if to say, "You expected this reaction, didn't you?" Somehow I had a pleasant feeling. Even though it wasn't revenge I desired. The Trovi family, which I come from, had already produced several empresses among the imperial family and nobility. Arranged marriages were common. Marriage was for politics and romance was for their lovers, and it was common for male or female nobility to have a beloved on the side. Ausies III, the previous emperor, spotted me as a match for the crown prince, and from an early age I was educated by the empress on etiquette and the workings of the imperial court. Fortunately, the crown prince Sovieshu and I took to each other, and we got along like good friends. We didn't see each other as lovers, but it was still something. It was the kind of relationship where even when we fought at home, we walked into the wedding hall with a smile. We worked well together, and we were quite fortunate. The nobility saw Sovieshu and I as only a pair of cubs, and we put our heads together and discussed the country we would build for the next generation. As an adult, Sovieshu inherited the throne from the late emperor, and after the coronation ceremony we were on good terms. Few months before, it was a bad day to plan for the new year. After consulting with the officials all day, I returned to my room to find my ladies-in-waiting with nervous expressions on their faces. "What's going on?" I looked around worriedly, and one of the ladies replied in a sharp voice, "The emperor went hunting and brought back a tramp. Then he called us and ordered us to wash the dirty thing." All the ladies-in-waiting were the concubines and wives of high-ranking noble families, and they bathed only me. For ladies that did not even use their own hands to bathe themselves, it must have been a bolt from blue. But it was quite strange. The emperor knew the pride of the ladies-in-waiting better than anyone else, yet he ordered them to wash a woman he brought back after hunting. What woman we don't know. If she's a prisoner or a slave, her leg was trapped. Leg, yes, the emperor found her caught in a trap and saved her. The ladies-in-waiting exchanged glances among themselves. They seemed to want to say more but didn't want to do it in front of me. "It's all right, tell me." After some slight pressure, one of them reluctantly opened her mouth. Even when she was filthy she seemed beautiful. I thought I imagined it even before I washed her, but she really was stunning when I was finished. Her beauty was comparable to the Duchess Titania, the most beautiful woman in the world. When they thought I was feeling uncomfortable, the ladies added their own chorus. Of course there is no comparison with your majesty. My face was rather attractive, however, as a young princess, and an empress everyone tended to flatter me, so it was unclear exactly how beautiful I was. As a result, I would exclude myself from such comparisons. However, Duchess Titania was known as the most beautiful woman in society. She debuted at the age of 17, and she was still an immaculate butterfly at the age of 40, and now this mysterious woman was equivalent to Duchess Titania, and even these high-nosed ladies thought so. Perhaps the emperor really did save a great beauty from the hunting ground. There was no reason for my ladies-in-waiting to notice if she was merely pretty. You can tell me anything. I can see you all have more to say. When I prodded them again, another lady finally gathered up her courage and revealed everything. The truth is, the emperor seems to be fond of her. The lady's face whitened as if she were terrified to let the words leave her mouth. The emperor, after washing her, I dressed her with clothing from someone with a similar size, and when His Majesty saw her he seemed concerned. "How did you get hurt? Why are you so thin? You look pale." "That sounds reasonable." At my remark, the ladies exchanged awkward glances between themselves. "You have not been in adulthood long and may not have experienced a romantic relationship. And there is a certain nuance and atmosphere, Your Majesty. We are on your side even if it's difficult to hear about this. And if it turns out to be nothing, then it will be fine." Among the ladies-in-waiting, the only one my age was Lady Laura, and the rest were older than I. Their wisdom was richer than me when it came to human affairs. "I see," I murmured in my embarrassment, even if what the ladies said was true, and that the emperor was interested in another woman he saved. What should I do? Should I go to the emperor's room and ask him if he was interested in his captive? Or drive her out, or have her work in the imperial palace? I didn't know how to react. Countess Eliza approached carefully. "How about you try your luck and say that you heard he found an injured woman?" Everyone agreed and said I should ask in passing. "Maybe say you heard it from one of the palace maids just in case." I nodded and smiled, praying it would not be a large issue. "I will thank you all, His Majesty. The emperor is a compassionate man, so he must have brought her here out of pity. When would it be a good time to ask the emperor about the woman he found at the hunting ground?" After much consideration, I decided to ask him at dinner tomorrow. Although we were husband and wife, our rooms were separated on the east and west. It was said that the rooms were placed to show that the monarchy symbolically supported each side of the country. That meaning had now faded, and now it was a perfect arrangement for the emperor and empress to live without having to touch each other. Although Sovieshu did not yet have a concubine, we ate and slept separately due to our busy schedules and different lifestyles. However, we had dinner twice a week, and that was tomorrow. Yes, it would be too meddlesome for me to visit today and ask about the woman from hunting ground. I will wait a day. I hadn't forgotten what my mother said to me before I was married. Do not interfere with Sovieshu even if he takes a concubine later. Is that really alright? Look at history. Were there any emperors without concubines? Even Ausias too, who is known as a great military leader, has had 20 of them. Do not waste your anger on it, Navier. All you have to be for Sovieshu is be young and beautiful and healthy. Do you understand my words? You can find a man like that and make him your lover. A commoner would widen their eyes at this kind of drama, but this was natural in noble society where political marriages were the norm. Of course, the right of inheritance would go to the children of the married couple, but problems arose when a spouse was in love with their partner and couldn't tolerate other lovers. Political conflicts happened that way. This must have been part of my mother's concern, and so, on her advice, I was not going to go see Sovieshu today. I would ask him tomorrow evening instead, and even if he took the woman as his concubine, I should pretend to ignore it. I was not in love with him. I knew other people lived like me. Still, when I thought about my husband taking another woman as his lover, there was a lonesome feeling in the corner of my heart. Strange. I lifted my hand and placed it on my breast. My heart beat neither slow nor fast. The next day, rumors of the hunting ground girls spread even faster. The only ones who spoke openly about it to me were my ladies-in-waiting. But even when sitting in a quiet place, I could hear the gossip among the palace. During lunch, the ladies-in-waiting complained throughout the meal. "I heard that filthy tramp is a runaway slave. She must have gotten onto the hunting ground while fleeing. The hunting ground is connected to Viscount Rotesh's estate, So she must have escaped from there. If she's a runaway slave, she should be sent back immediately. I can't believe the emperor took pity on her, and made us take care of her. Before dinner-time the ladies dressed me more methodically than usual. They clothed me in a glittering dress and adorned me with silver jewelry and simple pearl earrings, showering me with praise throughout. They always cared for me, but today they seemed especially adamant. No matter how beautiful the slave is, you are our empress. The emperor will have to wash his eyes after he sees you. Their efforts felt empty and passed through my ears. If Sovieshu was going to fall in love with me for dressing beautifully, shouldn't he have already done so before? All I had in my head were useless thoughts. However, even though I considered the efforts of the handmaids to be futile, I entrusted myself to them. After all the preparations were finished, I went to the Eastern Palace where the emperor stayed and sat at a dining table that was far too large for 2 people. At first we only talked about recent political issues, such as the preparations for New Year's Day. I waited for Sovieshu to bring up the story about the hunting ground girl, but no matter how long I waited, he didn't mention her. It was when he was cutting his steak that I finally brought it up. I heard that you found a runaway slave at the hunting grounds. Is that true? There was a clack as his knife hit the plate, and his hands stopped. He looked up and stared at me for a moment. Who told you that? His tone wasn't pleasant. In fact, he seemed rather tense. Seeing the wrinkle between his eyebrows, I deliberately covered up the source of the story. Everyone was talking. It was hard to miss. It must have been your ladies-in-waiting. It doesn't matter who told me. Again, is it true? Sovieshu looked noticeably uncomfortable when I repeated my question. Your Majesty, don't rush me. I don't know what you heard, but what happened was that I found a woman who was badly hurt, and I helped her. He called her a woman, not a runaway slave. I see. So where is she now? Empress, please tell me. We have 2 meals a week together. We have so many other things to talk about. Don't you think? The iciness in his voice was clear to me. Do not get involved in this in any way. Other things to talk about, Your Majesty. I did not suggest anything unusual. As the owner of the imperial palace, I am only asking if you brought in an injured woman. It's never happened before. Was I overdoing it? I had my usual tone and gentle smile on my lips. I spoke casually in order not to appear overbearing, as if discussing the New Year's Day preparations. Sovieshu looked markedly uneasy. However, he seemed to want to avoid the topic as much as possible, and the atmosphere became increasingly uncomfortable. Are you asking because you're only curious? Sovieshu looked at me suspiciously, and I blinked at him. I wouldn't be asking if I wasn't curious. She was accidentally caught in one of my traps, and I brought her here so she could be treated. She's not too injured, so I've had her put in a room with a maid to look after her. I see. Don't worry, I won't call your ladies-in-waiting again. Sovieshu resumed cutting his steak, the knife cracking like a woodpecker and echoing in the dining room. He usually had so much to talk about, but this time he remained silent. What did His Majesty say? When I returned to the West Palace after dinner, a group of my ladies-in-waiting who were gathered in my room anxiously approached me. He didn't say much. Countess Eliza's eyebrows lifted at my lukewarm answer. She didn't seem to believe me. Then you would not be so sullen. It's all right, talk to us, Your Majesty, that way we can be prepared. He said the woman was accidentally caught in one of his traps. There was no mention of her being a runaway slave or anything like that. Come to think of it, I didn't even get a name. He said he was taking care of her, and he seemed unhappy to keep talking about it. As soon as I finished, Laura stamped her foot with a resounding thud. The other more genteel ladies gave her a look, but Laura was already pouting and not paying attention to them. Your Majesty, do you know that's exactly what my father was doing at the beginning of his affair? Laura raised her voice, and Countess Eliza said her name in warning. Laura, however, had already gone this far and wouldn't stop. That's what it looks like. Those are exactly the early signs of an affair. Why wouldn't he want to talk about it? The ladies scolded Laura for talking too bluntly, but they did not deny her words. Countess Eliza finally took it upon herself to shoo the ladies out when I was looking depressed, then sat me in front of the dressing table and started combing my hair. The Emperor is a man who likes to hunt. He is doing this because it must seem like a miracle to him to find a beautiful woman caught in his trap. Countess, yes, Your Majesty. Before, my mother told me even if the Emperor takes another woman as his lover, I should not let myself be hurt. There are so many cases like that, and I shouldn't expect it to be any different. The middle of Countess Eliza's forehead creased. Countess Eliza had a rare marriage of love to her husband, and to such a person my mother's advice might sound ridiculous. I continued, I didn't say this in front of the other ladies, but I am a little prepared even if the Emperor welcomes a slave woman as his concubine. Your Majesty, but when he doesn't speak to me I feel a little down. Countess Eliza set the comb down on the dresser. I looked up at her, and asked her honestly. Whether he has 10 or 100 concubines, they're still concubines, and I'm the empress. He and I never loved each other to the point that we would die for each other, so theoretically we should still be fine. Yet why do I feel so empty? Countess Eliza reached out to embrace my head and shoulders. She held me still for a moment, then withdrew before speaking. Even though yours is a political marriage, you've been together since you were children up until marriage. It's no surprise that you're upset. I would feel the same if my child were to bring someone else in as their foster parent. I would feel upset if my parents took another child and favored them because they were more beautiful. And I would feel upset if my best friend brought someone else in and was more friendly to them. It's a natural emotion. Then would the emperor feel that way if I had another man next to me? Countess Eliza picked up the comb and started brushing my hair again, and I took her silence as a no. After a moment she finally spoke. To be honest, I don't know, Your Majesty. The more powerful your love is, the harder it is to look around. So I had no choice but to deal with my heartbreak by myself. I forced myself to smile. I see, I'm sure I'll feel better soon. She and I won't have to meet each other. Yes, even if the slave becomes a concubine, she still cannot enter into high society. Being a slave didn't mean one couldn't rise in status. It was also the case for the innocent who became slaves due to collective punishment caused by their family members. Every year the country restored a certain number of slaves to commoner status, but it was never the case for a runaway slave. Being a slave meant that one had a life sentence for some crime they committed. Because a runaway slave escaped without paying the price, they were considered the same as an escaped prisoner. An extra charge of guilt was added, and a runaway slave was considered the dregs of society to aristocrats, no matter how much Sovieshu lavished the woman. There was no opportunity for her to debut in high society, or for me to run into her. I nodded my head and gathered myself. Yes, Countess Eliza, it was natural that I felt empty when someone who had been my husband for a long time had a sudden interest in another lover. But I couldn't get more emotional now. No matter if he had another woman, he couldn't cut me off. There was only one empress in this empire after all. The emperor goes to see the slave day after day. I heard he even brings her food himself. He's acting so calm too, the audacity. He even called a court doctor to treat her leg. There were voices whispering between the bushes. Although the imperial palace gardens had flowering walls higher than one's head, I could still hear the gossip that filtered through. I designed this garden myself and deliberately placed a nest-shaped swing chair in an area not frequented by many. It was like my secret place. I didn't bring my ladies-in-waiting here, and so people said things aloud without them noticing me. About a week has passed. I closed my book and placed it on my lap. As Sovieshu's interest in the slave woman grew, so did the stories. Everyone's attention was on the woman who managed to capture the emperor's interest. Wasn't it fortunate that she and I never ran into each other? The next time I had dinner with Sovieshu, I didn't ask about her. Instead I acted as if nothing had happened and brought up the New Year's preparations. I decided to compromise at this point in time. Ignorance, pretend I didn't know, but coincidence came out of nowhere and confronted me. It was the day all the officials and I gathered in the conference room to discuss the preparations for the upcoming New Year. My throat felt clogged after speaking for so long, and after drinking a glass of warm water I took a walk in the central palace garden to relax. Artina, the deputy commander of the knights, accompanied me along with my ladies-in-waiting. As I discussed with Artina about whom to recommend for the ceremony, I heard a whisper from somewhere saying, "Is that her?" I looked around and saw a woman sitting in a wheelchair with two other women who appeared to be maids beside her. Our eyes met and the woman in the wheelchair struggled to stand. The two maids tried to stop her, but they dropped their hands when they saw my gaze. The woman shakily gripped the handles of the wheelchair as she stood up to bow in greeting. I wasn't sure who she was. I thought she might be the slave the emperor found, but we were near the central palace, and this was no place for a mistress to come. I didn't think there were any cases of one even working at a high position at the central palace. Still, she greeted me even when her legs were hurt, and so I gave her a nod of acknowledgement. I turned to walk away when I heard a voice from behind me saying, "Hey, hey." Was she calling me? This was the first time I heard someone say that to me in the palace after becoming empress. I turned back flustered and saw the woman in the wheelchair wheeling herself towards me. The maids were bewildered and called out, "Rashta, don't," but she ignored them. Did she have something to do with me? If she did, then surely she would know I was the empress. And yet she said hey to me. I stared at her with a perplexed expression on my face, and the woman named Rashta drew near and greeted me again. I'm Rashta. What was I supposed to do? Yes, Rashta. She smiled as if pleased that I called her by her first name. Did she really want me to address her like that? I was struck by curiosity, but not enough to ask why. The audience time had ended, and my brain was rotted having listened to the stories of strangers for 3 hours. If there was an emergency, then she would have pleaded for help as soon as she saw me. However, she was smiling cheerfully, so it didn't seem like she needed my urgent attention. I turned around again, thinking there was nothing more to see, but as I did so she reached out and grabbed the skirt of my dress. My ladies-in-waiting who were standing beside me were alarmed and beat away her hand as if she were a zoo monkey. How rude! Do you not recognize this noble? Rashta flinched back in surprise, stammering, I'm sorry, I should have called out to you, but I don't know your name. She really didn't know I was the Empress. Didn't I hear her whisper to the maid, is that her? Laura glared at Rashta and yelled at her, this is Her Majesty the Empress, be careful of your actions. Rashta's eyes widened. What I know the Empress? She knows the Empress. I frowned at her strange words, and she looked into my eyes and spoke softly. I'm Rashta. Who is Rashta? My ladies-in-waiting and I were terribly confused. Did we know each other enough to share our names? In my mind I tried to recall the women of her age that visited this country with foreign dignitaries. I did not meet with every single guest. There were the guests that were welcomed by me, guests that were welcomed by the foreign ministers, guests that met with Sovieshu directly. She had never been one of my mind. Had the foreign minister ever met a Rashta? It couldn't be. If she were from a great noble family, even the ladies-in-waiting would know about her, even if I didn't. Do you know me? I decided to be straightforward with her, and she looked surprised. You don't know me? I'm not sure. Rashta looked at a loss, and she whispered to the maids, what do? I could hear her, of course. But I was tired. I didn't even know who she was. I was about to ignore her and leave when Rashta called out again. I am living in the Eastern Palace by the kindness of His Majesty the Emperor, the kindness of Sovieshu. The Eastern Palace, the wounded legs, the woman out. The slave. Then why was she near the Central Palace? Before I could ask, Rashta's face paled. Your Majesty, forgive me for my rudeness. Miss Rashta is not a slave. A maid beside Rashta came forward and corrected me. Not a slave. But my ladies-in-waiting told me she was a runaway slave. If they were false rumors, then they would have informed me. It was not a credible story. But there was no such statement. The slave was more than what I expected. I didn't expect to meet her this way. I didn't care about the gossip, but she was as beautiful as the rumors suggested. Her kind of beauty wasn't like the glamour and elegance of a noble like Duchess Tuania. Rather, Rashta's image was soft and ethereal. Her large dark eyes stirred one's protective instincts, and her hair was a light silver that made her pure and innocent charm even more mysterious. Wait, my ladies-in-waiting bathed her, so why didn't they recognize her? I glanced around and saw some weren't with me. Unfortunately, the missing ladies were the ones that washed Rashta. Yes, now I know who you are. I nodded and Rashta beamed. Thank goodness. Actually, I've been wondering when we'd meet each other. I asked the Emperor, but he kept telling me that I didn't have to bother, but I thought we should still do so. Meet each other? Why, what should I call you? Your Majesty. Just call me Your Majesty. That's it. I didn't know why I was having such a friendly conversation with this girl of all people. Rashta seemed to feel tired and wanted to turn around, and she grunted in exertion as she moved her wheelchair. Sensing that my mood was spoiled, my ladies-in-waiting grabbed onto the handles of the wheelchair and pulled her slightly backwards. Stay away. Just who are you to act so friendly towards her? Laura's hands were trembling in anger as she pulled the other woman back. Filthy it was then. What do you mean filthy? Sovieshu appeared, his voice like shards of ice. The Emperor witnessed Laura insulting the woman he was in love with. It was quite a scene. Laura and other ladies-in-waiting quickly lifted their skirts to bow to him, but he gave them a hellish glare. I had already seen Sovieshu a few times earlier in the palace, and I stared at him quietly instead of greeting him again. Sovieshu looked at Laura, then turned to Rashta. Goodness, Sovieshu sighed. Rashta's eyes were wet, probably out of surprise, and the wide look she gave him made her look like a poor frightened animal. Don't cry. Despite his attempt to soothe her, tears began to drip down her face. I said don't cry. Despite the unsympathetic tone in his voice, Rashta did not stop. She seemed unafraid of his infamous cold attitude. I kept staring at her when Rashta continued to cry. To my surprise, Sovieshu pulled out a gold-embroidered handkerchief and held it out to her. Her tears didn't cease even when offered the handkerchief, and he sighed and wiped her face himself. You're a handful. There was a note of worry in his tone, and the corner of my heart throbbed again. No, it was natural, I reminded myself of Countess Eliza's words, and turned around and instructed my ladies-in-waiting to follow. Let's go. My legs ache. I wouldn't be able to stop Sovieshu from having a concubine, but I was free to avert my eyes from it. The ladies quickly followed after me. Wait, stop, Sovieshu called out to me before we had even taken a few steps. First Rashta and now him. Sovieshu glared at Laura and pointed to her. Leave that lady-in-waiting behind, Empress. What for? Leave her. She is my lady-in-waiting. You need to tell me first. Laura's complexion turned pale. I also felt an ominous wind blowing through my thoughts. Surely he wouldn't punish Laura for what she said to Rashta, would he? While Laura's behavior was not exactly exemplary, she was still a lady-in-waiting of the Empress. Rashta, on the other hand, was not yet a concubine, nor was she even lower nobility. She was even likely a runaway slave. For Sovieshu to punish Laura would publicly disgrace her in society. As well as myself, the Empress. I stared at him, and he turned his gaze back to Laura. She is a lady-in-waiting of the Empress, but she is also my subject. How dare she speak like that? Then I will scold her. You think a scolding will fix someone who calls another person filthy? Surely not. Sovieshu barked an order to a nearby guard, pointing his chin towards Laura. Lock her up for 3 days and give her only water and hard bread. Laura's face whitened, and the other ladies let out a small scream of distress. That is too far, Your Majesty. I stepped forward, but Sovieshu directed his icy glare towards me. She called a woman in a wheelchair who can't even properly walk filthy. Don't you think that is too far? Well, you only watched. You probably thought that was not too far. My ladies-in-waiting only stopped her because she pulled my dress. The look on Sovieshu's face only turned darker. You were walking away from her, Your Majesty. And what is wrong with holding a dress? Is the Empress' dress more noble than a human hand? Then I will have your servant pull at the hem of your cloak. Even if your cloak is not as noble as a human hand, is that still acceptable? Sovieshu raised his eyebrows and smirked. Your words are meaningless. Do you really think it is the same situation? Is it different? It is. Then what is the difference? Rashta is not a servant. I wanted to ask him if I should change my example, and what he would do if a concubine pulled on the hem of his clothes. Lock up the Empress lady-in-waiting for 5 days. Before I could say anything else, Sovieshu increased Laura's punishment. The more I opposed him, the more severe he became. I saw Rashta sitting behind Sovieshu with her eyes wide open, staring at him as if he was some sort of hero. The words I wanted to say threatened to leap from my mouth, but even the Empress could not overturn the Emperor's orders. I could call a trial to challenge Laura's punishment, but by the time the trial would be opened she would already be released. I accept the punishment, Your Majesty. As I was agonizing about losing to Sovieshu, Laura quickly stepped forward. My face turned red with shame and anger. Go. Rather than asking why the girl was near the main palace, Sovieshu complimented me for working hard all day. Sovieshu and I weren't passionate lovers, but we were good friends. Now we were neither. I gritted my teeth and turned away. Now I understood why my mother advised me not to get involved with the concubines. The imperial palace was buzzing over the news of Laura's confinement. The gossip was that the Emperor's punishment for the Empress lady-in-waiting was an outright expression of his love for Rashta. It was her first unofficial competition with me, and she had won. I didn't hear this with my own ears, but my ladies-in-waiting were furious and told me about it. I should have been there. A lady-in-waiting who had bathed Rashta exclaimed that were she present, she would have kept me away from the slave. But I think the Emperor really likes her. I used to have admiration for him, but this time he didn't even listen to the Empress' words. Despite their anger, the ladies-in-waiting were worried about the future. It's only been a few days since the Emperor met her. I'm worried. There was nothing I could do in this situation. Sovieshu and I acted like nothing had happened when we ran into each other at the central palace. I focused on my work and tried to forget what had happened that day when I was alone in my room. I remembered Sovieshu's cold gaze and felt the bruise in my heart, but it ached less when I kept myself busy. When Laura's imprisonment finally ended after 5 days, I went up to the tower to retrieve her myself. I asked the other ladies-in-waiting to bathe Laura in my bathroom and bring her some soup. I also ordered Laura's favorite cake. A secretary sent by Sovieshu came to me to deliver a message. His Majesty the Emperor wants to see you. Me. Yes. What could it be? I nodded and turned to Countess Eliza. When the cake is finished, tell Laura to come here and eat. Then let her know she can rest for a few days before she comes back. Yes, Your Majesty. I turned and nodded at the secretary, and he quickly led the way. The atmosphere changed as we went east, even though it was surrounded by the same wall. Perhaps it was because the palace was styled in completely different ways. I was concerned that I might encounter Rashta again, but she was nowhere to be seen in Sovieshu's bedroom. The emperor was sitting by a small round table. You called me. Sovieshu stared at me silently as I approached him. His eyes seemed full of things to say. What can I do for you? I spoke first, and Sovieshu seemed to hesitate for a moment, and pressed his lips. Your lady-in-waiting, the one who was imprisoned, Laura, the daughter of Marquis Teradal. I heard you took her back from her prison. She's my lady-in-waiting. She suffered for 5 days. Sovieshu looked even more displeased. Did you have to? Are you asking me if I had to take care of a woman that was punished? Sovieshu could clearly hear the mockery in my voice. You know what I'm trying to say. In other words, you retrieved the lady-in-waiting yourself, even though you knew I would be offended. No, partially I suspected that Sovieshu might be offended, but I also thought he might have already cooled down after 5 days. Perhaps after everything had settled, I could let him know that his punishment was far too much. Maybe not. I suspected you might be displeased. But now you're taking care of her. If you had any thought for me, you would have sent her away. What is the emperor if the empress cares for the people he punishes? It is not right to send someone away after they already received their punishment. Besides, what she did was not out of line, calling people filthy. She was trying to stop someone from pulling on my clothes. A scolding would be enough. The more I spoke, the stonier his expression became. So you will keep the lady-in-waiting. It is entirely up to me to decide who is my lady-in-waiting. Although Laura may want to quit working in the imperial palace, I was going to keep her for a while. Being punished because of a runaway slave was enough to make her an outcast of high society. If I let her go, she would have no protection, let alone against Sovieshu. As empress, I would use my name to safeguard her. Sovieshu sighed and turned away. I am tired of arguing with you. Can't you just be obedient to me for once? The empress does not have to bend to the emperors. Will continue on like this, and you won't even be able to compare. Compare with whom? He stared right at me, then he put on a wry face. I see that you're tired. Please retire for the day. Go back to and take care of that misbehaving filly. After Empress Navier left, Sovieshu sighed and rang a small bell on the table. The door opened, but it was not a servant who walked in the room. Since when do you work? At Sovieshu's puzzled expression, Rashta smiled sheepishly. I feel like I'm a burden when I'm not doing anything. So you're going to be working now? Rashta spread out her arms joyfully, and Sovieshu grinned. You can't even go around by yourself. Serving the emperor was regarded as a great honor among nobles and was a position that even those without titles coveted. But Rashta wanted to work for the emperor because she felt like a burden. She had no idea that the nobles would strangle each other over this position. What an unusual person! Sovieshu chuckled at her oddity. For Sovieshu there had only been 2 significant women in his life so far. One was his mother, a great empress, and the other was Navier, the current empress. He was familiar with the empress' imperial education and even studied together with Navier, but he thought the clumsy Rashta was incredible. No matter what she did, come here and have a snack. Sovieshu rang the bell again, and the servant who had been waiting impatiently at the door came in. Pumpkin pie, very sweet, and bring wine, a light one. The servant left to fulfill the orders, and Rashta clapped her hands and exclaimed, pumpkin pie. Do you like food that much? Not just any food. How many people have never eaten a bite of a pumpkin pie in their life? She smiled innocently like a child, and Sovieshu found he couldn't pull his eyes away from her. The empress doesn't even respond to jewelry, no matter how expensive it is. But you're still happy even with the little things. Doesn't she like jewelry? She does, but she doesn't have a lot of emotional ups and downs. She only expresses herself in small portions. Rashta frowned and gave a sigh. She grew up beautifully and doesn't know the harsh world. Anyone would take jewelry for granted. It's not that the empress is wrong, it's just that she has a lot of wealth. Even if you got her a big gem, it's not a surprise. That's true. Oh my god, my prey is smarter than I thought. Rashta didn't know whether he was making fun of her or not, and she blushed and puffed out her lips. You always call me prey because you're the prey I caught in my trap. So your majesty. Rashta laughed at his light joke, then settled to speak to him again. She twisted her fingers together and ventured forward carefully. You said you'd make me your concubine. Yes, the empress doesn't seem to know that yet. Sovieshu nodded and gave her a reassuring smile. We're in no hurry, so let's take our time. Your legs haven't completely healed yet. I'm not rushing, but I had a hard time when I met the empress before. I didn't know how to introduce myself, and what if it happens again? The emperor is going to take the woman as a concubine. It was a typical morning. It was neither cloudy nor rainy, nor warmer or colder. Today was just like yesterday and the day before yesterday. Unusual news came out of nowhere on this ordinary day. So the empress is busy with the New Year's preparations while emperor takes in a concubine. That's too much. He should at least have waited until New Year's was over. The ladies-in-waiting were complaining darkly among themselves. I stared silently at myself in the mirror. I was prepared for Sovieshu to make her his concubine, but I didn't realize it would happen so soon. Judging by the timing, the ceremony might officially happen just before New Year's Day. A sigh emerged from deep inside me, and I felt nauseous at the thought of everyone coming up to me at New Year's Day to talk about it. And even if they did not speak about it to my face, I was sure to hear them whispering from behind. However, I could not ignore the fact that the emperor was taking in a concubine, no matter how much I disliked it. "When is the ceremony?" The ladies-in-waiting glanced at each other, and eventually it was Countess Eliza who answered. "Rumor has it that he wants it to happen as soon as possible. He'll want it done before the new year." Around noontime, Sovieshu's secretary came up to me again to deliver a message. It was about the concubine, and the other officials kept an eye on us in an effort to catch some gossip. The emperor wants it to be simple, as there are other large events scheduled and time is tight. Simple. The emperor's concubines were not recognized as part of the imperial family, and her children were not recognized as prince or princess. The best that could happen was to earn favor and take the title of duke, but with no claim of succession. Even so, it was possible for a concubine to carry the emperor's child, and it was customary to hold a banquet. It was no wedding ceremony. However, the concubine would be the center of the attention of the banquet, and would later sign a contract notarized by the chancellor. Is the emperor saying to hold a simple banquet or omit it altogether? It's impossible to invite a large number of guests at such a short notice, so we'll skip the banquet. Is there anything I need to handle? If there isn't going to be a banquet, there isn't. His Majesty said you needn't worry about it at all. As far as I knew, omitting the banquet was not unusual. The inside of the hall would still be decorated in honor of the concubine that day, but instead it would be a smaller affair to dine with the emperor, invite the people that were close to them, and sign the contract documents. But I needn't worry about it. Was it out of Sovieshu's pride or his consideration? Tell him I received his message. There was no harm to me. The secretary bowed and left. The other officials were staring at me, and when I glanced up, they hurriedly lowered their heads and pretended to go back to work. Do not tremble in front of them. They would whisper if I showed any signs of hurt, even though the concubine was nipping away at my life. I didn't want them to think it was over just because my husband loved another woman. Placing on an indifferent expression, I reviewed the plan again and advised them on the necessary revisions. The emperor will sign the contract first, then you sign on the thin black line below his name. Baron Lant, one of the emperor's secretaries, was put in charge in educating Rashta. When the baron finished explaining the basic outline of the documents, Rashta's eyes widened and she let out a small wail. That was not usually a sound made by an aristocrat. Baron Lant stared at her for a moment, flustered, while tears streamed from Rashta's eyes. I understand what you mean, but Rashta has no signature. You can make one. Rashta's face turned red at the casual way he answered. Baron Lant finally realized why Rashta was struggling. You don't know how to write? When Baron Lant was assigned to Rashta, the emperor had told him she was a commoner, and so he assumed that she had basic education. Perhaps the rumors were true that this beautiful prey the emperor favored was indeed a runaway slave. There wasn't much investment in teaching slaves how to read or write. I suppose you don't know. He wanted to ask her if she was a slave, but he smiled, pretending not to know, and set down a blank sheet of paper in front of her. It would not be easy to teach her to write in a few days, but she could quickly learn how to draw her name. If you don't know how to spell your name, I'll write down several versions that sound like Rashta, and you can choose one and memorize it. Fortunately, Rashta quickly mastered spelling. It should have been a frustrating task for someone who came from slavery, and Baron Lant was astonished. Am I doing all right? You're doing excellently. After praising her, and receiving a smile in return, Baron Lant explained what she could expect from the signing ceremony. There will be a big banquet, and all the nobles will be there. Miss Rashta can invite as many friends as she wants. While when the chancellor comes up to you and unfolds the government documents, you sign it. The documents, the chancellor will keep it safe. Rashta stamped her feet in delight and let out a small squeal. Baron Land watched her for a moment before adding another thing. This is not an obligation, but sometimes the empress sends a gift to the emperor's concubine when she signs the contract. A gift. The empress is the owner of the palace. From the viewpoint of the owner, a concubine is one that will live with them in the future. This means the concubine not only receives the emperor's respect and acknowledgement, but the empress as well if she is given a gift. If there are several concubines, the ones that receive a gift from the empress are regarded as the top concubines. Rashta suddenly looked insecure, so Rashta will receive a gift from the empress. I'm not sending one. The ladies-in-waiting exchanged relieved glances among themselves. Thank God. I was so worried that Her Majesty might send her a gift. There were many reasons not to send one after Sovieshu's secretary left. I researched any precedents just in case. Even if there was a banquet, there was no obligation to give a gift. If there were multiple concubines, one could withhold gifts to prevent certain ones from building too much power or influence with the empress' close relatives. But the situation with Rashta was either. In any case, I had no desire to give one at all, and Sovieshu had sent his secretary to tell me not to worry about it. Why couldn't I just say, please take care of my husband, don't worry? I don't know if there's a reason to send one, but I won't. A satisfied look came over the ladies' faces. Laura would have been happy if she were here. I was thinking of going out of the palace today, so I'll tell Laura about it. Your Majesty, how is Laura? When I saw her the other day, she spoke angrily about that woman. Marchioness Tarathil is also furious, and tells the story every time she has a tea party. I thought it better that they were on my side. Sovieshu and his aides would take good care of Rashta anyway, and I didn't think those close to me needed to be supportive of her. By the way, Your Majesty, may I ask you something? What is it? Rumor has it that the Prince of Western Kingdom is coming for New Year's Day. Is that true? The other ladies-in-waiting stopped talking and fixed their eyes on me. I nodded, and they squealed as they covered their faces or fanned themselves. I strained my lips to keep myself from smiling. The ladies-in-waiting had every reason to look forward to his appearance. The Prince of the West was the lone younger brother of the king, who was renowned for many things. He's so handsome, isn't he? They say eye contact is enough to put you under his spell, but I hear he's quite stubborn. I wonder if even the current king of the Western Kingdom has given up on trying to get him married. Are the rumors of him being a seedless watermelon are true? I don't know, but it's a bit suspicious that the king hasn't had any children, and neither the prince, when he's been with many women too. I nodded discreetly as I listened to the whispers of the ladies-in-waiting. The Western Kingdom was a country of great military power, virtually equal to that of our Eastern Empire in terms of wealth. It was the richest in the world. The prince, who was said to be the first in line to the throne of such a place, had many rumors swirling about him. I left my thoughts of Sovieshu and his concubine behind and indulged in the sugary conversation of the ladies. There's no banquet. When Rashta asked Emperor Sovieshu how big the banquet would be and whether she could invite her friends, she was not prepared for this blow. But the Baron said we were going to have a big party. Didn't I tell you that it would be New Year's Day soon? I didn't want to rush this, but you were the one that wanted the signing ceremony as soon as possible. Despite his explanation, Rashta only looked on in puzzlement. Sovieshu realized he was thinking too highly of her level of common sense. She seemed smarter than she appeared, but he had forgotten that she knew nothing about the nobility. It's my mistake. What do you mean? It is not easy to arrange a large banquet. There are other things I am busy preparing. Time is tight, and it's rude to have one large feast after another. But is there another banquet on the same day as Rashta's signing ceremony? New Year's Day will be soon. Rashta turned crestfallen as her dreams of being congratulated by nobles at a lavish grand banquet turned to dust. She had always wanted to see people flocking to her, and so she persuaded Sovieshu to have the ceremony as soon as possible. It was clear that the emperor would be annoyed by this, and so Rashta did not show any signs of unhappiness, and remained silent. However, her disappointment only increased on the day of the ceremony. Even if there wasn't a grand banquet, she still expected one of some sort, and when that didn't happen, she expected the emperor shower her with apologies and a promise of gifts. There was either a word of congratulations nor a gift from the empress. Either she felt sad, as Baron Land had told her that the palace's great halls were under the domain of the empress. Rashta had diligently practiced her signature, but after signing the document she felt empty when she finished. The chancellor immediately left, saying he had work to do. There was no cheering, applause, or the feeling of ecstasy, as if she had everything in the world. Sovieshu also left with a "there's work I have to finish and I'll see you later." When Rashta returned to her room, she buried her face in her hands. "Why is it like this?" Rashta's maids approached and asked her what was wrong, and the hurt that she had been holding inside her finally burst. "The Empress must hate me, otherwise we wouldn't have skipped the banquet or the gift. Even if she doesn't give me a present, couldn't she show her face?" "Don't cry, Rashta. Why are you crying on such a good day? Don't worry, you'll rarely see her anyway." However, Rashta's hurt did not fade when Sovieshu finally hurried to see her after he finished his work. He noticed she was in a somber mood. "Why does my prey look so down on this meaningful day?" "What do you mean? Meaningful day? I haven't been congratulated by anyone." "Not congratulated by anyone. The Chancellor congratulated you." He bowed to you, and the servants as well, but what Rashta wanted was the congratulations of the nobles, not the servants. She wanted to be recognized by those who lifted their chins as if they were the best in the world. The Empress must loathe Rashta. As Rasta's face grew gloomier, Sovieshu was forced to confess something. "The Empress didn't prepare a banquet or a gift because she hates you. I told her not to because it wasn't a good time." Rashta nodded, but was clear that she didn't believe him in this atmosphere. It was impossible for Sovieshu to relax and enjoy himself with his concubine. The next day, Sovieshu gave his secretary a gift, who in turn gave it to Rashta in the name of the Empress. "Your Majesty, the Grand Duke Liltiang has sent you a gift of silk from a foreign land." The ladies-in-waiting had finished preparing me for the day earlier than usual, so I sat with them as I drank my breakfast coffee. In the meanwhile, Prince Liltiang had sent a servant bearing a gift. I looked up from my coffee cup and examined the item on the servant's outstretched hands. It was a gorgeous blue silk cloth that shone like the scales of a cutlass fish. I sighed and put down my coffee. The silk looked beautiful and expensive, but it was hard to accept it purely considering the intentions of the sender. Prince Liltiang was Sovieshu's uncle and 2 years older than his nephew. Although he had no desire to be the emperor, he regularly bribed me and asked me for favors since I became the empress. If I accepted the gift, there was certain to be difficult demands attached to it. "Thank you, but tell him that I cannot accept it because it would cause a misunderstanding." This had happened many times before, and the servant smiled awkwardly as if he expected it to. He murmured a respectful yes and stepped back. "The gentleman hasn't gotten tired yet." When the door closed, Countess Eliza spoke her mind and the others burst into laughter. The atmosphere was so peaceful again. Quite unexpectedly, a second visitor was announced. I went to the Central Palace after breakfast every morning. So few visitors came here in the early hours, but 2 people, and one morning I allowed admittance of the visitor, although I remained curious. Fortunately, the second visitor was not a servant of a noble who offered bribes, but an official who came to coordinate the day's agenda. It was not a difficult task, and after exchanging a few words he left. To my surprise, a third visitor appeared. This time it was Rashta, who I thought I would rarely meet face to face. "Rashta, really?" I looked back at the guard in surprise. He bowed his head and answered yes with a look of contempt. Countess Eliza clicked her tongue again. "Why does she dare came here?" The guard did not know. He only stood by the door and announced the arrival visitors. However, it seemed like he felt responsible telling me the news, and he had an embarrassed expression on his face. Countess Eliza turned to me anxiously. "Will you receive her, Your Highness?" Well, frankly, I did not want to meet her at all. Why should I be obligated to see someone that would only hurt my feelings? Someday I may be able to laugh and talk with Sovieshu even if he has many beautiful concubines by his side. That time wasn't now, however, and it was still difficult for me to treat Sovieshu's lover in an easy manner. "However, let her in." Countess Eliza cried out in surprise. "Your Majesty!" I picked up the handle of the half-full cup of coffee. I did not want to see her, but Rashta was just a concubine, and Sovieshu's first love was the first woman he loved. Sovieshu had been chilly towards me since she first appeared, and I did not want to fight with him again. Even if I could not love him passionately, I did not want to be hated by the Emperor. I could tolerate just this one visit. "This our second time meeting, Your Majesty. I am Rashta." I didn't know if she was pretending to either know nor care about the incident, Laura, but Rashta greeted me with a bright smile as soon as she came in. Countess Eliza did not hide her displeasure and sat back in stony silence, while I schooled my facial muscles into something as blank as possible. Fortunately, I had a great deal of practice in hiding my emotions in less than ideal situations. Unlike before, I am sure you are his concubine. Congratulations, thank you. I gave a mechanical greeting. What was I supposed to say now? I thought over it for a moment, and decided to go straight to the point. What brings you here? What brings me here? You and I are like sisters now, your Majesty family. Countess Eliza was caught by surprise and choked on her cold coffee. She placed her hand in front of her mouth, as she coughed, and glared at Rashta. I was equally bewildered. What did I just hear? Sisters family? Family because we have the same husband. My smooth face almost cracked. I fought to keep down a twitching nerve. The concubine contract was literally a contract, and they were not recognized as part of the imperial family. During the contract, a concubine could receive a favorable amount of wealth, but if the contract was not extended, she had to leave the imperial palace. The children born by the concubine were not considered princes or princesses even if they were fathered by the emperor. Yet now the girl considers us family just because we had the same husband? There were so many errors in that statement that I didn't even know where to start. As I tamed my thoughts, Rashta gathered both of her hands together. May I call you sister? The air chilled around me. I pressed my lips down. This was the limit of my generosity. No, Rashta's expression dropped. She blinked her eyes and stared at me as if in fright. As if she never anticipated answer like this. That was more amazing to me. She practically said, yes, let's be sisters. I took away your husband. But can we get along? Is it because you don't like Rashta? Her large doe-like eyes began to well with tears. It's not a matter about hating you. Of course I hated her. You may have become the emperor's concubine but are not my sister. I tried to explain this difficult truth with a smile, but Rashta only seemed to cry more. She must have thought I was ridiculing her. Smiling didn't work, so I wiped it away and decided to end our meeting there. Leave. After Rashta left, everyone in the room looked around in shock. Indeed, I really don't know what to say about her. Countess Eliza was dumbfounded, and so were the other ladies in waiting. Most of them had never met an emperor's concubine before, let alone one that called on the empress. With a frown, I turned to the oldest lady in waiting. Is that what a concubine is like? Although I had been in and out of the imperial palace since I was young, I had never met any of the previous emperor's concubines while being educated in court. I hadn't been old enough to debut in society yet, and so I had nothing to do with the concubines of the late emperor. Concubines rarely see the empress. It would only hurt each other's feelings, and the concubines don't want to be disliked by her. Maybe Sovieshu liked a character like Rashta. Countess Eliza sighed. She will need lady-in-waiting sooner or later. The emperor says she is a commoner, but I am afraid she is not like a commoner at all. I wonder if any young woman would want to be the lady-in-waiting of the concubine. When I visited her, she told me I was a concubine but not her sister. Is that how it's supposed to be, Baron Lant? Or does the empress hate me? After the contract signing ceremony was over, it was Baron Lant that managed most of Rashta's affairs. He visited her today without any particular purpose and was surprised when he heard this unexpected tale. You visited the empress? Yes, she sent a gift to Rashta. I thought I should go and greet her if she sent a gift. Baron Lant groaned and pinched his forehead. Rashta tilted her head. What is it? Did Rashta do something wrong? Worse than that, the positions of Miss Rashta and the empress are in opposition of each other. Why, they both serve the same husband. Is that what Rashta said to the empress? Baronet Lant was momentarily dizzy. However, Rashta's dark huge eyes convinced him she acted out of innocence. One did not hold children accountable like adults. Rashta was more ignorant of aristocratic society than even aristocratic children, and so he had to show some consideration. But even so, Rashta, did anyone stop you when you said you were going to visit the Empress? Cherli and Kisiv? Who are they? Rashta's maids. The emperor assigned them. Other than those servant girls, do you have a lady-in-waiting? Rashta tilted her head again. No. Baron Lant stood up from his seat with a determined look. On that note, he went back to Emperor Sovieshu and reported on his visit with Rashta. Your Majesty, Rashta is now your concubine, but she is ignorant of aristocratic society. She has her maids, but she is also in need of a lady-in-waiting. Another secretary listening from the side commented, with what a noblewoman would want to serve a commoner like Rashta. Rashta is not the first commoner to become a concubine. Baron Lant snapped back at the secretary, then turned to plead again with the emperor. You should at least give her a lady-in-waiting to guide her in aristocratic society. Sovieshu made a sound of agreement. It was something I had already been thinking about, Baron Lant. Yes, Your Majesty, find a lady-in-waiting that will be responsible for helping Rashta. Yes, Your Majesty. I was strolling through the gardens at the Western Palace, when I saw a large handsome bird perched on a huge flower picking its feathers. What a strange bird! The ladies-in-waiting hadn't noticed it as they were busy chattering on the futility of Sovieshu's secretaries trying to find a lady-in-waiting for Rashta. I approached it carefully by myself. When I reached out my hand, the bird quickly hopped on. It shook its wings and nuzzled its beak against the back of my hand as if accustomed to humans. Was this bird raised by nobles? As I stroked its small head, I noticed a small piece of paper tied on its foot. I opened it and found a handwritten note in small script. "I'm a foreign guest who will arrive at New Year's Day," wrote this. After drinking, I let out a laugh, and the ladies-in-waiting came over to see what had happened. "Oh, that's new, pretty. What a handsome bird. What is it called?" "I know it's a bird that's difficult to tame. Isn't it used for hunting?" When I showed them the letter, the ladies-in-waiting grinned and encouraged me to write back. I smiled broadly. Was this really from a drunk foreigner? There will be many foreign ambassadors arriving here for New Year's Day, so it wouldn't be unusual. Usually the birds flew towards a bird pagoda that gave off a unique scent that attracted them. It was amazing how this bird flew all this way. I took out a small pocket pen that I always carried with me, and another lady-in-waiting retrieved a piece of paper from nearby. A drunken bird flies back. If it finds the right way, it will be better off than its master. The ladies craned their heads to watch me write the letter and burst out in laughter again. I tucked away the pen, watered the bird, then tied my note onto its leg. The bird nuzzled its beak against my hand again and flew away. How adorable! That bird seems to like the Empress. Yes, isn't it amazing that it only goes to the Empress? When I returned to my room after listening to the ladies' chatter about birds, I found one of Sovieshu's secretaries waiting for me. "What's going on?" It looked like he had been waiting for a while, and he answered immediately, "The Emperor has summoned you." The ladies' faces hardened as well as mine. The pleasure of seeing the handsome bird disappeared, and my heart became stiff. Before, I never minded when Sovieshu called for me, but now I couldn't help but think, what else is going on? I understand Rashta was now a concubine, and I turned away her attempts to be more friendly with me than was necessary. That was it. Shouldn't it be the end? Is he going to criticize me for not calling her my sister? No. No matter how much he thinks of her, it's not to that degree. Sovieshu had seen his mother as he grew up and knew how empresses and concubines were like. "Please wait." After entering my room, I took off my walking dress and changed into a more formal one. Fortunately, I did not run across Rashta again when I followed the secretary to the Emperor's room. I walked in and Sovieshu offered me a cup of tea and immediately entered into conversation. While concubines don't require a lady-in-waiting as much as the Empress, they should still have one or two to attend to them. I will give Rashta one or two as well. "So I've heard. I see your secretaries are searching around, yet after a few days no noblewomen have come forward. Is that so?" "I think they are not coming forward because the Empress, the palace's owner, is not coming forward." "So can the Empress herself find a lady-in-waiting for Rashta?" "Nonsense. Why should the Empress provide a lady-in-waiting for the concubine?" The ladies-in-waiting who heard my story shouted angrily. Countess Eliza, who suffered from high blood pressure, rubbed her hands behind her neck while Viscountess Verdi fanned her and spoke in a soothing voice. "Thank goodness Laura is not here. She is a fiery young woman, and would act unbecomingly." I sat immobile and hadn't said a word, and the ladies gave me a nervous look. "What are you going to do, Your Majesty? Are you really going to find her a lady-in-waiting?" No one stepped forward when the Emperor's secretaries searched for one. I sighed. I wish I could say no, but he gave me a direct order himself. All the ladies had tears of indignation, but there was no other suitable way. I sighed again. A lady-in-waiting was usually of similar or lower rank than the noblewoman she was serving, but Rashta was not a noble at all. In this case it would be appropriate to find one of the fallen, or the lower nobles. But that posed a problem, as many of them could not get to the palace. I considered it over for another moment before turning to Countess Eliza. "We should start looking nearby, so please send an invitation to the young ladies and women in the capital." "Yes, Your Majesty, a tea party with all the noblewomen." Rashta's eyes rounded. "Are you sure?" Charily, the maid who had given her the news, answered with, "I told you already. It's hosted by the Empress. You can't even imagine how grand it is. All the ladies of the capital have been gathering in the palace for hours. The invitations were sent out yesterday." "What about Rashta?" Even if you are not a noble, Miss Rashta, you're still a person of His Majesty the Emperor. This really is a shame." Rashta's mouth turned downwards and her shoulders sagged. "I thought so. The palace seemed to be noisy all day long, the Empress is being unfair. She skipped the banquet because of New Year's Day, but now she's having a party that excludes Miss Rashta. Tea parties and banquets differed in size and expectations of guests, but to Cherylee and Rashta, who did not know about this, a party was a party, and to them it was unfair that Rashta was not invited. Rashta pushed the floor with her toes and fell back onto her bed. Rashta must be hated. The Empress is just jealous because the Emperor loves you. Why don't you dress up and go to the palace too? But Rashta wasn't invited. Is the Empress the only one that lives here? This is Rashta's home too. The two maids took turns thinking up a plan, but Rashta shook her head and pulled the covers over herself. No, they don't want me. The maid's eyes watered sympathetically. Poor Miss Rashta. Although only noblewomen were invited, the number of guests exceeded my expectations as women of high or low rank attended. I didn't even know the names or faces of some of them, as they rarely made appearances in society. The garden boasted a spread of puddings, jellies, and chocolates so that everyone could walk around and eat. At first everyone seemed a little surprised to see a buffet layout at a tea party, but soon they were laughing and talking among themselves in amusement. When the time came, I called for their attention. His Majesty the Emperor has asked me to provide a lady-in-waiting for his concubine Miss Rashta. Because it has to be before New Year's Day, I cannot search far away for one. Is there anyone of your acquaintance who would want to be a companion for Miss Rashta? I did not directly say who among you wants to be Miss Rashta's lady-in-waiting. Although the standards were lower than usual, those who lived in the capital city still had a certain amount of pride in their position. The nobles of the capital were not higher than the nobles of the provinces either, and there would be no one who would want to take the position below a commoner concubine. And so I chose my words carefully. I finished and waited for someone to come forward. The women and young ladies exchanged glances, shaking their heads or shrugging their shoulders. Silence gripped the air. After an uncomfortable pause, Lady Alicia, Laura's best friend, cautiously spoke up. Your Majesty, this has been the talk for days, but please don't tell the Emperor what I'm about to say. You mustn't. You may speak, Lady Alicia. Isn't it rumored that she is a runaway slave? Someone may want to serve her even if she is a commoner. Except if the rumors are true. Instead, everyone is reluctant. The other ladies nodded, putting in their own word or two. One will not be able to carry face if they become the lady-in-waiting of a runaway slave. Your Majesty, even if there was someone suitable for the position, they'll end up getting slapped after that rumor. To be the lady-in-waiting is not an honor but an insult and a punishment. The gossip seemed to have spread widely in society. The noblewomen hesitated before they asked me, "Is the rumor true, Your Majesty?" I told them Sovieshu's answer. She was a commoner who was injured by him on accident. In the evening the ladies all returned to their homes and I went back to the palace. Tonight I would have dinner with Sovieshu, and I had better inform him that I was unable to find a lady-in-waiting for Rashta. To my surprise, there was no food on the dining table. Sovieshu was already seated. I looked down at the empty table discomfited, and Sovieshu spoke to me in a calm voice. I heard the Empress summoned all the ladies and ate snacks for hours. I was worried that you would be full, and so I did not have the table set tonight. That's true, I can eat with Rashta, so don't worry. What about Rashta's lady-in-waiting? Have you found one? I called all the women and young ladies, but none offered to serve, Your Majesty. Sovieshu frowned. That's all. Yes, then there must be a reason. The issue is not money. What does that mean? If I spoke about the rumor that Rashta was a runaway slave, I would be betraying the trust of the other noblewomen. Lady Alicia had asked me to keep it a secret, and so I did not speak a single word of it. It's only my assumption, but with the New Year's preparations going on, I don't think anyone wants to take care of anyone else for now. They would be twice as busy. Sovieshu pondered for a moment, then spoke in a half-playful voice. Did the Empress say something strange when she called the noblewomen? Although he was pretending to be amused, there was a sharp underbite to his tone. Of course not. I do not know anything about your concubine, but I wouldn't say anything strange. People say things despite not knowing anything, that is true, but there are some people that doubt their partner without hearing or seeing anything for themselves. A flash of guilt crossed Sovieshu's face at the implied meaning of my words. We looked at each other in silence. If that's what you say, then I won't doubt you. It was Sovieshu that backed down first. I don't doubt you either. I stepped down too, and Sovieshu smiled and looked at me reassuringly. I was just asking, so don't be offended. I was already offended, but if I fought openly with the Emperor I would lose. I concealed my crumpled pride, but nausea ran through my body. I gave him a mechanical smile and stood up from my seat. How did this video make you feel? We're interested in your emotional response and any thoughts it may have sparked. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this, please like, share, and subscribe. Hit the bell for updates.